All right, and now we welcome in. I got to read this so I don't get this all wrong here. He is a member of Mr. Bungle, the Fantomas, or was a member of Grip Inc., Testament, Suicidal Tendencies, Misfits, Dead Cross. He has a phenomenal new solo record out, and also was in a band called Slayer that we're going to talk about here in a minute. My favorite metal drummer of all time, and my friend, Mr. Dave Lombardo. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing great, Brian. How are you?
I am good, thanks. So happy that you are here. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's
It's
great talking to you as
one of
always.
my favorite things about doing this podcast is I get to see old friends that I haven't seen in a minute. So it's always like,
Yeah.
hey, let's get my buddy on here. To begin here, I don't know that there's a song in any form of music, certainly metal, where when you do this, you know exactly what song you're talking about. So where did that iconic drum thing come from or came from?
Jeff recorded the demo. He recorded the drums and the guitar, and presented that to us at rehearsal. And we thought, it was a little odd. It's like, what? You just want it to start this way? And I don't know where the rain came in, but he presented, practically the song was practically done, and it was on cassette, and we thought it was great. At least, once the riff kicked in, that blew us away.
Yeah, look, it's a fantastic song. Certainly one of the. I hesitated doing it in this early in the existence of this podcast because even though we're not doing a countdown really of songs, I do have a top 20, and this one is definitely in it. But I felt it was important to get you on. And I mean, how could I have you on and not talk about the song? It's like, one of the most iconic drum, just not just that one part, but just the entire song. Mm-hmm. One thing that I was always blown away by you is your creativity in drumming, because it's not that easy in metal. It's easy to do all sorts of crazy things and, be, that kind of drummer, but it's a lot harder. And, you do it really well. Lars, I think, does it pretty well. But the drums in songs kind of tell a part of the song, and there's rhythm and there's melody in the drums, which when you talk about that with people, they go, well, it's just keeping a beat. It's like, well, not really. Like, there's a whole thing going on, and if you had done anything differently in this song, it wouldn't have been as amazing as it was.
I think, well, especially with that song, I mean, I had an idea of what I was doing in the first 3 records that we did, 4 records. From learning by listening to other drummers. At that time, obviously, it was Iron Maiden, Motorhead, Judas Priest. So the drummers at that time laid the groundwork for me. And, learning those songs and playing those songs with Slayer, really helped me hone in, my ability to contribute drums to music that was presented to me. But then later, Rain and Blood, Rick Rubin really kind of honed my creativity, and he helped me apply the creativity in very special places that impacted the next part of the song. So let's say when the vocals, let's say in the verse, you keep that space open. You could add little tiny nuances, but you don't want to overplay, because then you're taken away from the vocals. And then when the chorus comes in, or the bridge or whatever, he helped me hone in my creativity and add, let's say, a creative drum roll to lead into the next section. So I think that's where you're hearing, as a listener, the music, the drums being played in a more melodic form, as it's being played it's part of the song, instead of, I'm playing drums and I need to show you how good I am at these chops that I've developed through the years. It wasn't about that. It's about the song and making it as special, and giving it, the right amount of drumming.
Yeah, and that's what really always impressed me about you guys in the early days, because we were all just young, kids,
Yeah.
and we're all learning. But you guys were learning at a very high level at very young ages. And I just noticed from like record to record to record, like everybody got better. Everybody's playing was better. You think like, I mean, these guys are so good already. And then it's the next level. Even after Hell Awaits, they go, I mean, that's probably my favorite Slayer record. I go, what are they going to do next? I heard a couple demos, and then Rain and Blood comes out. Oh my God, this is like insane. They went to yet another level. And I think that goes to you guys really being open to learn and continue your craft, basically.
Yeah, what helped immensely was the amount of touring that we were doing. That's where you really develop your chops, your stamina, and you start hearing things a little differently from the stage perspective. And I think, at least, in my experience, that's where I started hearing music in a different way, in a more performance way, rather than just, creative. It's like, you know the power that certain rhythms have when they're performed live, so you try to, record those rhythms, as authentically as possible, as authentic as possible. um, you know it just comes with experience, and I believe the touring really helped us in developing not only our sound, but our style.
So when you first started to want to play the drums, what was it that drew you to play, actually picking up and playing the drums?
That runs deep, my bloodline, I believe. Being Cuban, drums are a big part of Cuban culture and Cuban music. um, and drums were around, uh, not drum set, but congas, bongos, music. I mean, instrument indigenous to the island. Um, and my family, when I was growing up in Southgate, Southeast LA, would go to these Cuban clubs, and there would be Cuban bands playing. And, I would disappear. My mom wouldn't know where I was, and I was backstage watching the drummer, you know. And she says, I've been worried about you. Where have you been? I've been here, watching, the vocalist take a break while the drummer is taking a drum solo. And, he's drinking out of a flask, and I'm watching this. I had to have been like maybe 8 7 8 years old, but I saw drummers perform with such passion, and almost like they were in pain, uh, performing, and because you see their expression on their face, and they're hitting the drums, and you see this passion come out of them. And it's really like, I want to feel that. I want to be a drummer, and it's just, I think it starts then. And then, of course, living in a Cuban household, but then when I listened to the radio or went outside, I was in this country, I was in America, and listening to KMET and KLOS, and listening to Jim Ladd, and playing all these amazing songs, not just the Doors, but Zeppelin, Deep Purple. It was inspiring for someone that was growing up and that loved music.
Who are your drum gods?
Of course, I mean, of course, it's generational.
Yeah, of course.
So for me, my drum gods would be Bill Ward, dear friend, who I'm so happy for, that is going to be able to perform in Birmingham. Mitch Mitchell, right? Ian Pace from Deep Purple, um, and Ginger Baker, who my brother used to play for me. When he would come home from work, my older brother would play the live album, Wheels of Fire, and there's a song called Toad, and he used to air drum to it. And I used to, of course, being a little kid, I mean, I had to have been maybe 4, 5, 6 years old. He would sit me in front of the stereo, and lay out a bunch of boxes and give me pencils, and kind of like teach me to play drums, on just these makeshift little drum kit, and all to just leave, for me to leave him alone, because he had just come home from work and just wanted to relax and listen to music. It's like, here, play, so it really runs deep, man. And then later, of course, discovering all these other bands like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, that just took me to a whole other level. And then, punk, obviously, from Jeff, and that just catapulted my drumming and passion for drums.
It's interesting you mentioned Mitch Mitchell, because he's come up in several conversations I've had recently, because all I do is talk to people who are into music, and I am into music. And same thing, we're talking about like original drummers who had a big influence on people. He's come up quite a lot in the last, I'd say, month or two when I'm talking about it, which I find really interesting, because obviously phenomenal drummer, but when you think of Jimi Hendrix, you think it's Hendrix, and the guys behind him, as good as they were just kind of keeping the beat. And I went back and listened to some of the Hendrix stuff, and I go, now I see why they're talking about that, because, well, Hendrix is doing all his, incredible stuff. Mitch Mitchell's back there doing a bunch of really cool things too that you don't really realize until you say, oh, I should probably listen to that. And I found that was happening.
Yeah, Jimi Hendrix, Zeppelin. I didn't mention John Bonham, but all these guys, they came from obviously the jazz, the jazz world. They were all jazz drummers, but the band was a trio: bass, guitar, and drums. And usually the guitar player obviously either sang, or there was an extra vocalist, that would be the singer in Zeppelin's case. And that's really special. That's a real special configuration of musicians or band. Pantera is one of them. Each individual member can hold their own position as musician. When the lead guitar player goes off, when the guitar player goes off and starts doing a lead, the bass player and drummer, they have to lock in and hold the foundation for the guitar player to go, and just wait for either the cue or the point where the song goes into the next bridge or whatever. So that's a real special configuration. And the musicians that I looked up to when I was growing up, Sabbath, and all these bands that I mentioned, they were all trios. And that I believe is a special art, that music art, that is kind of lost, because now we bring in two guitar players, which is great. And we brought that in. I remember bringing Jeff into Slayer at that time, because we were inspired by Judas Priest, and so that style, or that configuration of bands, were real special when I was growing up, because I saw their value in what they had to do to keep the foundation going.
I love you to bring up the jazz component too, because we talk about the blues. Obviously, metal started from the blues, and a lot of these bands were blues bands, and it had a big influence. But I also think that another element, along with classical, especially with drums and even the music, is jazz. And it's interesting when you listen to all these jazz drummers, and there's so many amazing guys. And a lot of times in jazz, the drummers almost dominate more so than anybody else does. So it's an interesting point you bring that in, and that kind of gives it because really the drums are the backbone of any band. If you don't have a good drummer, the band's not going to be good. It's simple as that. I've never seen a great band that does not have a great drummer. It just doesn't exist. And it's that kind of swing that the jazz musicians have brought in that I think inspired a lot of metal to have that sort of swing along with the heavy riffs, and it works so perfectly together.
Yeah, it does. It does. If you have the right drummer that could deliver that feel, you're golden. Um, it's important to feel music. It's not just about rudiments and teaching your limbs how to do these and be ambidextrous. You really have to listen to the song and know what to add to the music and not overplay. It's easy to overplay, and it's a fine line. You have to really be careful because the drummer could really screw things up and lose it for the band.
I saw Dream Theater the other night and hung out with Portnoy afterwards, who said to say hello.
Awesome,
And
man.
yeah, he's great, and they were great. And I've asked him this before because he's in a lot of different bands, or even Dream Theater. They're playing 3 hours a night. You were in a lot of different bands, very different bands. How do you remember all the things you have to play in these bands? I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm grateful that my hard drive is still in top notch. uh, I think there might be an art to memorizing. um, there was a period where I had to have notes on stage, and every now and then I do have some notes. But there was a period where, I was like, I had to have a lot of notes, and it was because, I had a lot of fogginess going on because of thyroid. There was a thyroid issue happening, and so luckily I got that under control, and I didn't have any issue. I haven't had any issue since. Um, but yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and it's you memorize things in blocks. Um, the one of the most challenging bands that I play in is the original Misfits, and because our set list is approximately 38 songs, and of course, Misfits, the songs are very short. They're like 2 minutes, a minute 40, 2 minutes and a half. I think maximum might be 3 minutes, and a lot of them are little similar, and the challenge is Glenn doesn't like to follow a set list. He calls the songs out. So I'm having to, as soon as he calls the song, I'm like, my brain is just like, okay, how's this one start? Oh, okay. Then I count the band in. Sometimes I'll start a little too fast, and he turns around and tells me, hey, pull it back. He does this gesture, looks at me, and then I have to pull the song back a little bit because my adrenaline kicks in, and I sometimes just want to play fast. So it's a challenge, and thank goodness I've been okay with memorizing, and it just takes a lot of practice and listening.
Yeah, I don't envy you, my friend. That's a lot. That's a lot. So you're talking about playing fast, and of course, the famous thing about the album Rain and Blood was originally it was supposed to be 33 minutes. You guys got in the studio and spit it up, and it ended up being 29 minutes. How much of that story is actually true?
I don't know if the song was out. I mean, if the album was actually going to be 33 minutes. But we did, once everything was done, it's like, hey, it's only 28, 29 minutes. So I don't know. I don't know what happened. There was a lot of, there was a lot of testosterone and youth in there, and that's the product of, I think I was 20. I was 20 years old when I recorded that. And yeah, man, it's insane when I look back and remember all this. Listening to some live performances blow me away because they're that much faster, necrophobic. Oh my God, I saw a live version of that, and people were were discussing, in the comments underneath, saying, "Oh, it's sped up." It's like, no, it's not sped up. It looks like it's sped up because I'm playing so fast, but it's not. That's how we played it, and it sounds right. It's perfect. It's how it's supposed to have been, performed.
Yeah, and that record could not be any longer. I mean, it's just that 29 minutes is some of the most intense 29 minutes in the history of metal. I remember when I first listened to the record, I was exhausted at the end of it. I was like, oh my God, this is just insane. I
Yeah.
always like to ask this to people when you're in the studio making this record. It's obviously become, one of the most famous albums of all time. Were you aware that there's something special happening there, or you're just kind of in the moment?
I was in the moment. I nobody knew at that time what we were doing. Um, we obviously knew that we were the studio, with Ruben, and it was odd because he obviously came from the rap world, and so we were weary and kind of questioning the whole thing, but it seemed all to make sense. It was strange, but we were definitely in the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting because sometimes, like I had Andy LaRock on a couple episodes ago, and we were talking about Abigail by King Diamond. And I
Right.
asked him the same question, like, so were you guys aware that you're making some historical stuff here? And he said, you know what, I was new to the band, so I was kind of learning what was going on, but we did have a feeling in the studio that we were doing something really cool. So it just goes anyway. And I think they were a little bit older at that time too. I think when you're a little older, you get it. You guys are still so young. I think you're just like,
Yeah.
I'm in the studio and that's big time now. We're on a big record, label, and this big time producers here. It's a whole different world there.
Yeah, yeah. We were excited, about the music, and we were happy, with the way it was, turning out, and in rehearsal when we were working on the songs. Um, but yeah, we didn't know we were you know, on the precipice of this moment in music history. It just wasn't. It wasn't, something that we were thinking at that time.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear people say that because you just don't know. It can go either way.
Yeah.
Before I get too long into this, I do really want to talk a bit about your new project that you just put out, which I think is really, really great. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as you all know, I mean, I think I've recorded now, I think I counted 41 albums, and I don't know how many special guests, like one offs I've done. But I love all styles of music, and so with that said, and obviously I love Pink Floyd. I love bands like Massive Attack. I love bands like Portishead, and even drones. Just music drones, ambient music. I love listening to that, and I need a balance in my life, And so, when I met Paula, my wife, probably about 15 years ago, um, I didn't know she sang for a living, and she really didn't know who I was. And so, we started talking, and she said she sang for a gentleman in Las Vegas called Wayne Newton. And I was like, wow, Wayne Newton. She said, I was his main backup singer for about 10, 11 years. And so she hesitantly, gave me one of her demos, and I was like, "Wow, this is beautiful. I would love to work on something like this." And time went on. We tried to collaborate. It didn't work. The way she plays guitar, she does this picking, and I don't know how I'm bar chords, and bar chords and junts, and so we had a tough time finding our MO, our method of operation. Then during pandemic, um, I had I was starting the recording of my solo record, Rites of Percussion. Um, and I was dabbling in, obviously Pro Tools, and recording drums at home, and discovering new software, and this and that, and just really expanding my engineering capabilities. And then I asked her, I told her if she could play some of her music on piano, and she said yes, of course. And so, because that was her first instrument. And then next thing you know, she started writing these songs and performing and playing them on the computer, on the piano, on the computer, the keyboard, and I was able to go in there and add drums, add synthesizers, and all this stuff. And she started laying down vocals, and one thing led to another, and we had an album. And the funny story is we're mixing Dead Cross record, and Justin Pearson, who is the head of over at 31G, a punk label in San Diego, I played it for him and Jay Rustin and the mixing engineer, and he was like, dude, this is so fucking punk. And I was like, I said, what? He said, yeah. I said, it's just something Paula and I were doing, and we're going to release it on CD Baby. She's really not interested in any pressure of any kind of label demands or anything like that, and she just doesn't like the attention, and she just wants to do this. It's just something fun for her and I. And so he decided to release it, and here we are on the second record, and now we got picked up by Ipecac, which we were shocked, because they declined the first album. They said, we don't know what to do with this, but it's worked out great, and it's a lot of fun. It's basically three chords and the truth, and surrounded by dark, kind of gothic, ambient, down tempo, lo-fi music, and it's been fun. It's been great.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. And I love hearing you play different types of stuff too, because you're such a great drummer at anything. It's always interesting to get your take on different stuff. But I think it's really cool. The first album I didn't really know what to expect, and I was like, oh, this is actually really cool. And the second one, I think you've even honed it a little bit more on what you're trying to do. It's really, really good stuff. So you guys should all check it out, please.
Thanks.
Give us the title so they can.
The album's called To Cross or To Burn, and the band's called Venomous. And
I wanted you to say that because I don't think I ever get it right. So
Venomous.
All right.
Venomous. Simple. And To Cross or To Burn, and it's out on February 28th.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
that's coming up on Friday. Well, by the time this is out, it'll be already out. So you guys have to go check that out.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to go back a little bit to the song Raining Blood. Another thing that you do drum wise that I think you probably do, or definitely do really better than anybody else, is changing pace. And I noticed that in a lot of the early Slayer stuff, and especially on this song, where you go into the kind of the galloping sort of thing, and then in like a split second, the whole thing changes and it's faster and it's a whole different thing. And those transitions, they're really hard to do. And not a lot of people are able to do it well, but it's like instantaneous snap of fingers and all of a sudden something else is happening and it's so seamless. How do you do that?
I think it's the, my internal metronome. I have this very instinctual understanding of time, and the tempo is going, let's say 180 beats per minute, and then I could split it halftime, and then I could even go slower, but still keep that same pulse. Learning how to go in and out of those tempos is important for a drummer. You have to have that. That's just something I think I just developed in time, from playing. making sure that the pulse is still there. You could play, let's say you're at 180 beats per minute. You could split that 180 into 90, and then you could split that into 45. You could just keep going, and then it gets slower and slower until, and then you're back up into the beat again at 180. So it's kind of tricky, and it is a challenge, but it's something you just have to hone in. And I think, the more you tour, the more you play with your bandmates, the better you get at that.
Well, thank you for the math lesson there. That was very
If it made sense, I'm sure
it does. I mean, I'm not a musician whatsoever, but I understand those sort of things. And when you're talking about it, it's really fascinating because, when you just watch somebody playing drums or whatever it is, they're just playing, and you don't really think about the mechanics or the metronomics, like you said, behind it. And when you explain it that way, it's like, and you're explaining it just as easy as you do when you're playing drums. Like, it's just, there's something in your brain, my friend. It's very impressive.
That's funny. There's somebody else brought up that same question about time and how fluid I am with weaving in and out. There's a perfect example online on YouTube. There's a video of a drum clinic, a drum workshop I had done in Ireland at the Voodoo Lounge or something, and I set the click, and I solo and play beats, and you could hear me just weave in and out of that tempo. And you could get a really clear idea and understanding how I do it. And that's just, like I said, that's something I just developed.
It's amazing. And you are amazing. And thank you so much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it, and appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you too, Brian. And you know what? Thank you. Thank you for handing me that card that said, hey, you were walking out with Betsy. And I think we had to have been at the Woodstock, and
Yep.
You handed me a card. Hey, I want you guys to record a song for me, for a compilation. And I put that card in my back pocket of my wet leather pants, and I pulled it out the next day. I remember this vividly, and pull it out the next day, and showed the guys, and the rest is history. And I'm so grateful for that, and appreciate you, and appreciate everything you and your company have done. And just keep kicking ass, Brian.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I'm just happy I was there at the right time and the right place to give you guys to start. You did all the work. I just was the little conduit there, but I appreciate that. Thanks so much, dude. And thanks again for doing this.
You're welcome.
You can't leave yet,